The morning sun spilled over the wide plains, casting gold across the dusty fields. A chill hung in the air, and the scent of hay and old wood filled the barn. Sarah tightened her worn shawl around her shoulders as she entered the ranch for the first time. She was small, thin, and tired, her face lined with the years of trying to survive alone after her husband's death. She'd lost nearly everything, her home, her savings, and worst of all, her sense of belonging. All she wanted now was work, any kind. The foreman, a gruff man named Bill, pointed toward the barn. "You'll start there. Clean the stalls, sweep the floors, and keep quiet. The boss doesn't like strangers hanging around the house." Sarah nodded silently. "Yes, sir." She didn't expect kindness, she just needed enough pay to buy food for the week. The rancher, Mr. Grayson, she'd heard, was known for being strict, especially since his wife passed away 2 years ago. He lived alone with his 5-year-old twins, Ethan and Ellie, and barely spoke to anyone unless it was about work. By noon, Sarah's hands were blistered, her hair dusted with straw. But she didn't complain. She hummed softly under her breath, a tune she used to sing to her own child, a baby boy who hadn't survived his first winter. The sound of it filled the empty barn with warmth. That's when she heard giggling. She turned, startled, and saw 2 little faces peeking through the door, golden curls and bright blue eyes. The twins. They shouldn't have been there, but she couldn't bring herself to scold them. Instead, she smiled. "Well, hello there," she said gently. "You two are supposed to be with your papa, aren't you?" Ethan grinned. "Papa's busy. Bill said we can't go in the fields." Ellie, shy but curious, stepped closer. "What are you doing?" "Cleaning up your horse's home," Sarah said, kneeling down to their level. "See this broom? It's magic. Makes everything shine." They laughed, and soon she had them helping, picking up stray straw, wiping buckets with their tiny hands. When she told them stories about her old farm, their eyes lit up. For the first time in months, Sarah felt the faint flicker of happiness. By the time the sun dipped low, the barn looked spotless. The twins, worn out from play, yawned and curled up on a pile of hay beside her. Sarah smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Ellie's forehead. She didn't mean to fall asleep. But exhaustion pulled her down gently, and before she knew it, the world faded into soft dreams. Hours later, the heavy sound of boots approached. Grayson entered the barn, his broad frame outlined by the lantern's glow. He'd come looking for his children after Bill mentioned they'd been missing all afternoon. His eyes, sharp and cautious, scanned the barn, and froze. There, in the soft straw, his twins lay nestled against the poor widow he'd hired that morning. Ellie's head rested on the woman's arm, Ethan's small hand clutching her sleeve. Something in Grayson's chest tightened. For 2 years, he'd lived like a machine: work, eat, sleep, repeat. His wife's death had carved a hollow inside him he didn't know how to fill. The twins reminded him of her so much that sometimes it hurt to look at them. But seeing them now, sleeping so peacefully in a stranger's arms, it was something he hadn't seen in a long time: comfort. He stepped closer, careful not to wake them. The widow stirred, her eyes fluttering open. When she saw him, she gasped and sat up quickly. "I'm so sorry, sir," she whispered, heart pounding. "They came to play, and I must have dozed off." He looked at her for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. "You're the new cleaner?" "Yes, sir. I'll get back to work right away." But Grayson shook his head slowly. "No, leave them be." His voice softened. "It's been a long time since they slept like that." Sarah blinked, unsure how to respond. The rancher knelt, brushing a bit of straw from his daughter's hair. "They haven't had anyone gentle in their lives for a while." His tone carried a quiet sadness that touched Sarah deeply. She understood loneliness, she'd lived inside it for years. She hesitated, then said softly, "They're good children." "You've done well, sir." Grayson didn't reply. He only nodded once, his jaw tight, then turned to leave. But before stepping out, he paused and looked back. "Come to the house tomorrow morning. We'll talk." Sarah's breath caught. "Yes, sir." That night, in her small rented room in town, she couldn't stop thinking about those children, and the man who'd looked at them like he'd forgotten how to love. The next morning, she arrived at the ranch again, nervous. The twins spotted her from the porch and ran toward her, shouting her name like they'd known her for years. Grayson watched from the doorway, a cup of coffee in his hand. "You've made quite the impression," he said when she approached. "I'm sorry if they bothered me yesterday," she murmured. He shook his head. "No. They haven't laughed like that since their mother passed." His voice grew rough, as if admitting the words cost him. "I need someone to watch them during the day. I'll pay double your cleaning wages." Sarah blinked in shock. "Sir, I don't think I'm fit for that. I only came here to clean." "You have a gentle way," he interrupted quietly. "They need that. I need that." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind rustled the dry grass, and the twins' laughter echoed across the yard. Finally, she nodded. "All right, I'll do my best." Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of the ranch began to change. Sarah cooked simple meals, read stories to the twins, and walked them to the edge of the pastures each evening to watch the sunset. Grayson often found himself lingering near the kitchen, pretending to look for something while secretly listening to her laughter mingling with theirs. One evening, he returned from town to find Sarah outside, mending a torn dress under the porch light while the twins played beside her. For a moment, he just watched. Her soft smile, the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the calm she brought wherever she went. Something inside him stirred, something he thought had died with his wife. He cleared his throat, and she looked up. "You've made this place feel alive again," he said quietly. She smiled faintly. "It wasn't me, sir. It was your children. They just needed a little warmth." His gaze lingered on her. "And you?" he asked. "What do you need, Miss Sarah?" Her hands stilled. "I stopped asking for things long ago, sir. I've learned to be grateful for what life still offers." Grayson nodded slowly. "Then maybe it's time someone offered you something more." She looked away, unsure what he meant, her heart suddenly racing. That night, when she tucked the twins into bed, Ellie whispered, "Miss Sarah, are you going to stay forever?" Sarah smiled softly, her throat tightening. "As long as your father wants me to, sweetheart." But when she stepped out of their room, she found Grayson standing in the hall, his expression unreadable. He said nothing, but his eyes told her what words could not. He didn't just want her for the children. He wanted her for the way she made their home feel whole again. And though neither spoke it aloud, something fragile and beautiful began to take root in that quiet ranch house. Something like family, born from sorrow and stitched together by the simple grace of love rediscovered. The days rolled into one another, stitched together by the hum of work and the sound of laughter echoing through the wide, open plains. Sarah found herself falling into the rhythm of life at the Grayson Ranch, mornings filled with the smell of coffee and bacon, afternoons echoing with the chatter of the twins as they followed her around the barn, and evenings that melted into gold and crimson as the sun dipped beyond the fences. She had never thought she would call any place home again. But every day, as she wiped Ethan's dusty cheeks or brushed Ellie's curls after supper, the ranch began to feel less like a job and more like a sanctuary. Grayson was a man of few words, but she was beginning to learn the quiet language of his kindness. The way he left an extra blanket by her door on cold nights. The way his rough voice softened whenever he spoke to the children around her. The way he sometimes paused mid-step, watching her laugh with the twins, a ghost of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He had built high walls around himself, walls of work, silence, and duty, but Sarah could sense the cracks forming. One evening, after the day's chores were done, Sarah sat on the porch with a cup of tea, her eyes following the distant line of horses grazing beyond the hill. The twins had fallen asleep early, worn out from chasing chickens around the yard. She was humming softly when she heard footsteps behind her. "Can't sleep?" Grayson asked, his deep voice cutting through the quiet. She shook her head without looking at him. "Just enjoying the peace. It's different here. Feels safe." He leaned against the railing beside her, arms crossed. "It's been a long time since this place felt safe for anyone." Sarah glanced at him. The dim lamplight caught the edges of his face, strong, tired, shadowed by memories. "You mean since your wife passed?" she asked softly. He nodded slowly. "Emily was the heart of this ranch. When she died, everything just stopped working right. Me included." His honesty caught her off guard. She hadn't expected him to open up, not after weeks of polite distance. "I know what that feels like," she said quietly. "When my husband died, it felt like I lost my breath. I had to keep moving just to remember I was alive." Grayson turned his head toward her. "You have children?" She hesitated. "I did. A little boy." He didn't make it through his first winter. Her voice trembled slightly, but she forced a small smile. He would have been 6 this year. Silence stretched between them, heavy and fragile. I'm sorry, he said finally, his tone deep and sincere. Don't be, she replied. It's strange, but sometimes I think his short life still had purpose. Maybe it taught me how to love other children who needed it. Grayson's eyes lingered on her profile, illuminated by the soft glow of the porch light. You've done more for my kids in a few weeks than I managed in 2 years. She looked down, shy under his gaze. They're easy to love. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that seemed unfamiliar on his face. You make it look easy. From that night on, something shifted between them. It wasn't spoken, but it was there, a quiet understanding, a connection born from shared grief and gentle healing. In the mornings, he started joining her for breakfast. Sometimes, after finishing his rounds on horseback, he'd stop by the barn where she was working and lend a hand, even when there was no real need. She'd tease him about how clumsy he was with a broom, and he'd laugh, a deep, warm sound that startled both of them at first because it had been so long since laughter had lived on that ranch. The twins began to sense the change, too. Papa smiles more now, Ellie whispered one afternoon while they picked wildflowers near the fence. It's because of you. Sarah's heart tightened. No, sweetheart. It's because of you. And Ethan. You're his sunshine. Ellie shook her head stubbornly. No, it's you. Papa looks at you like he looks at the sky before it rains. Sarah laughed softly, brushing a lock of hair from the girl's forehead. You're too smart for your age. That night, as she tucked the twins into bed, Ethan asked a question that made her breath catch. Miss Sarah, if you were our mama, would you stay forever? Her hands froze on the blanket. For a moment, she couldn't speak. I'm not your mama, sweetheart, she whispered finally, trying to smile. But I'll be here as long as your papa needs me. Ethan nodded, sleepy-eyed, and turned over. But Sarah didn't sleep much that night. The boy's innocent words echoed in her chest long after the lamps went out. The following week, the ranch faced its first storm of the season. Dark clouds gathered over the hills, and the wind howled across the plains. Grayson had been out in the pastures all day, securing fences and moving the horses to the stables. Sarah stayed inside with the twins, keeping them close by the fire. When the storm hit, it came hard, thunder rattling the windows, rain pounding the roof. The twins clung to her arms, frightened by the noise. Shish, she soothed, pulling them into her lap. It's just God's drums. He's reminding us he's watching over us. They nestled closer, and she rocked them gently until their trembling slowed. Hours passed before the door swung open, and Grayson stepped inside, soaked to the bone. His hat dripped water, and his boots left muddy prints on the wooden floor. Everything's secured, he said between breaths. Cattle are fine. You're drenched, Sarah exclaimed, rushing to grab a towel. You'll catch your death out there. He chuckled softly, his breath visible in the cold air. You sound like my wife used to. The mention of Emily hung between them, but this time it didn't hurt as much. Sarah smiled faintly and began rubbing his shoulders dry with the towel. Well, someone's got to look after you, she murmured without thinking. He froze for a second, then looked down at her, her hands gentle on his arm, her eyes warm despite the flickering light. Something in his chest ached, and he found himself whispering, "You already do." She paused, her breath catching. Neither of them moved. The only sound was the storm outside, wild and alive, as if nature itself held its breath with them. Finally, she stepped back, her cheeks flushed. "You should get out of those wet clothes," she said quickly, turning toward the fire. "I'll make tea." He didn't argue. But when he returned, dry and warm, she was sitting by the hearth, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, watching the flames dance. He sat beside her, their silence companionable. The twins slept in the next room, the storm slowly easing outside. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" she asked. "For being here. For them. For me." Her eyes glistened. "You don't have to thank me, Mr. Grayson. Sometimes we end up exactly where we're meant to heal." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the fire. "I thought I'd never feel peace again after Emily. But lately," he hesitated. "Lately I don't feel so hollow anymore." She swallowed hard. "Then I'm glad." The next few months passed gently, like a slow spring thaw. The ranch began to bloom again, not just in the fields but in the hearts of those who lived there. Grayson laughed more, the twins were happier, and Sarah's presence filled every empty corner with warmth. She planted flowers by the porch, started baking bread on Sundays, and even convinced Grayson to join them for picnics by the river. One evening, as the four of them sat under the cottonwood tree, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and amber, Grayson turned to her. "I used to think this land had taken everything from me," he said quietly. "But maybe it was just waiting to give me something back." Sarah smiled. "Sometimes we have to lose what we love to make room for what we need." His gaze held hers for a long time. "And what if what I need is you?" Her heart stumbled. The world seemed to fall silent, even the wind stilled. She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to run, afraid of hope, afraid of losing again. But another part, the part that had come alive since meeting him, whispered that maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop running. She didn't answer that day. Instead, she let the question hang between them like a promise waiting for the right moment. But the moment came sooner than either of them expected. Late one afternoon, while Grayson was away in town, a fire broke out in the east barn. No one knew how it started, a lantern, perhaps, or a lightning strike from the storm brewing nearby. Sarah saw the smoke first. She didn't think, she ran. The twins were playing near the yard, and she screamed for them to stay back before sprinting toward the flames. The heat was unbearable, the smoke thick and choking. But inside, she heard the terrified cries of trapped animals. She covered her mouth with her apron and forced her way in, coughing, desperate to free them. When Grayson returned, the entire ranch was chaos. He leapt from his horse, shouting for Sarah, but no one had seen her. Then, through the smoke, he saw her stumble out of the barn, face blackened, arms shielding a calf she'd dragged to safety. He ran to her, catching her before she fell. "Sarah," he shouted, voice breaking. "Why would you do something so foolish?" Her eyes fluttered open, weak but steady. "Couldn't just stand there," she murmured. "Life's too precious to watch burn." He held her close, his heart pounding with fear and relief. "Don't you ever scare me like that again," he whispered fiercely. "I can't lose you, too." When she finally recovered days later, she woke to find him sitting by her bedside, his rough hand wrapped around hers. "You stayed?" she asked, her voice hoarse. He nodded. "Didn't plan to move until you opened your eyes." Tears welled up, unbidden. "You didn't have to." "Yes," he said quietly. "I did." He hesitated, then added, "I meant what I said by the river, Sarah. You're what I need. What we all need." She looked at him, the stoic rancher who had once been nothing but silence and sorrow, now holding her hand like it was the most important thing in the world, and her heart broke open with a flood of emotion she could no longer hide. "Then maybe I was meant to find you," she whispered. From that day on, their bond deepened into something unspoken but undeniable. Grayson never rushed her, never demanded more than she could give. He simply made space for her, in the ranch, in his days, in his heart. And Sarah, for the first time since losing everything, began to believe that love could come again, not in a blaze of passion, but in the quiet constancy of shared mornings, laughter-filled dinners, and the tiny hands of two children who now called her, Mama. The land healed, the family healed, and in the soft rhythm of that simple, steady life, Sarah found what she had been searching for all along. Not just work, or a home, but a reason to live again. And every night, as she watched the twins sleeping soundly in their beds, and Grayson sitting by the fire with that rare, peaceful smile on his face, she knew the truth deep in her soul. Sometimes, love doesn't come when you seek it. It finds you when you're too broken to ask for it, and too tired to dream of it. It comes quietly, like dawn over the plains, slow, golden, and full of grace.